I'm going to read a story that you particularly like the name of. So it's called Revenge is Sweeter Than a Piece of Cake. This is a fiction story, although there may be some truth to it. Almost anyone's life is full of frightening experiences. Just getting through life can be traumatic, whether it be a visit to the doctor's office or the dentist's, or dealing with a schoolyard bully, or facing the death of a loved one. Walking across a field of flowers one day, you may encounter a hand sticking up out of the ground. My name is often attached to something truly bizarre, so much so that my name itself is a symbol, a shibboleth for something more frightening than what most people have encountered. When people that I know whisper to me, "They're out to get you," or as in the case last week, when my contractor finished the repairs on my house and fence, occasioned by the errant northeaster, the bill came to just short of $6,000. We drove Pall Mall in his truck to the bank to get me there 3 minutes before it closed at 6 p.m. And of course they didn't have hundreds, as they usually do for me. None at all, in fact. And I had to make do with tens and twenties piled up in my two arms and clutched in front of me as I walked out the front door of the bank and made my way to his truck, where, on opening his eyes and seeing me walk towards him, struggling to open the door with my arms full, he said to me, "I can't protect you when you act like that." All I can say to that is, you just don't know the places I've been or the things that I've done. In years gone by, I was what was then called a drifter, moving from place to place as if I were a human tumbleweed. And most every place I went looked like some place I'd already been. Just a different weed patch from the one I'd left, but still a weed patch where the morals dropped as fast as a John's trousers in a flea bag hotel room. I was in some hick town somewhere east of Bakersfield in California, more than 3 decades ago, in some sagging and decrepit rooming house that had been new when William McKinley was president. I'm in there with a nearly full bottle of booze and some weed to smoke, but that day I'm not alone, because I've got a woman with me who had already promised me her full attention to whatever the situation called for, and who was like my place, a bit decrepit and sagging, and whose name, incredibly, and this I can never forget, for even though her face may fade, her name will not, as it was Guernsey. She had shown me her driver's license with Guernsey on it and with a date of birth well before mine. But of course I had no driver's license to respond with, as I was a booze hound back then, with no desire to run anyone over in a drunken blackout, which I had with ever increasingly ferocious frequency. Guernsey and I had just kicked back with a concomitant kick-off of our shoes, accompanied by a big gulp of our whiskey sours, when the door to my room opened by itself as it flew off its hinges, and in barged 2 thugs with badges, who leeringly, loudly announced, "Caught in the act." Guernsey let out a scream worthy of Fay Ray as one unshaven badge holder socked her in the eye and ripped the front of her dress off her. She fell in a heap on the rickety chair, which splintered under her, as his partner told me, "Hands up," and my whiskey sour hit the floor. "You raped her, and look what you did to her, you pervert." He came at me with a sneer now as the other guy wheeled and stood over me. "You'll go to prison for this," I was told. Can you imagine what I felt like at this moment? I'll tell you. Frozen to the spot, I could not have moved if I had been ordered to. In my mind, I thought, how can this be? We were just 2 people getting together for some fun. But that's not what was really going on. It was all part of a plot cooked up by Guernsey and her pals because she knew I had money, as I was always careless about showing it, as if I had to say to everyone, "Here, I have something of value," because obviously I myself am worthless. That's the way I was taught to think of myself, and really there's very little I can do about it, especially when I was on the booze as I was back then. This whole scary scene was to get me to fork over my substantial bankroll, as Guernsey knew I had one. So when they said I could avoid arrest with a payment to them, I had my suspicions. but also I had my reasons for complying. I had a job as a librarian in an industrial warehouse for the blind. While one of the two undercover vice detectives accompanied me to the bank to get the money, I knew the other one, left behind in the cheap hotel, was doing with Guernsey that which I had planned to do if we had been left uninterrupted. Or maybe I wouldn't have if I'd gotten too drunk, which is just as likely to happen. I withdrew all the money but didn't close the account, as that would have taken extra time, and the guy waiting just outside the bank for me was in a big hurry. The money was just under $1,000, and back then that was a lot of money. Somehow the vice cop trusted me not to cheat him, and I didn't, and I gave it all to him, and when I got back to the room no one was there. But I did cheat them, as I didn't tell them that I had more money in another bank under a different name a few blocks away from the first bank. I was a real mess by now, and on the verge of doing harm to myself of a lasting nature, but I didn't for some reason, because in some way I couldn't let all this just go by the boards. If I didn't act, I knew I would just go down further until there was no getting back up again, and I was just a doormat and not a human being at all anymore. But what was I to do? I was no good at fighting. When Guernsey was attacked, I did not step in and hit her attacker. I just stood there, frozen to that floor. And I hadn't yet started to carry an appliance in my pocket, like in later years, and as I do now. I went back to work at the Lighthouse for the Blind and was a nerd librarian with a guilty secret who would have lost his job if those guys had really been a team of undercover vice cops. But underneath my exterior, I seethed and longed for a chance to even the score. I did the only thing I could think of. I hired someone to help me. But first I did some research, as I had seen Guernsey's driver's license and memorized the address, as was my habit. It was out on the edge of town by the garbage dump. It was a small house, not much more than a shack. When I went out there, I saw her, and she almost saw me too. So it was a good thing I was wearing a disguise, like an old man with a limp and a false beard that I kept in a drawer under my ties and socks. When a drifter drifts upon another drifter, sometimes you recognize each other's humanity. In my case, I picked someone big and strong-looking with a just-don't-care attitude. I knew I had the right guy because he always carried action figures around with him wherever he went, and sometimes I'd see him bite their heads off and swallow them. Eventually, I came up with my idea, as has always been a method to my madness. Make no mistake, I really have a bent for madness, a sort of genius that makes me what they call unpredictable. I have a taste for blood, if you will. The plan was simple. Late at night, go out there in a truck and then steal a garbage truck from the dump nearby and drive it over the little shack Guernsey called home and flatten her like a pancake. The only hitch was I did not know how to drive, so I needed a driver. And I gave him most of the money from the other bank account to make me feel like a whole man again. Only he didn't want to do it in the dark and said early morning was the best time, so that's what we did. He parked his little subcompact off the road and we went to the dump, where he had no trouble at all starting one of the trucks. I still don't know how he did it without having a key, but start it did. And then a short ride to the place, and then full tilt into the house, and down it went like a house of cards. I saw Guernsey run out the back of the house in just a slip as it went down. Later I heard the unshaven one was trapped in there and had to be rescued with both his legs broken. My partner in crime soon left town with the money I'd given him that day. I followed soon after that on the bus headed to Salinas and then on to Fresno and points north to begin once again to build myself up with a new job and a new name and new money, but with the head on my shoulders held up high, as I knew in my heart I was still just a drunken bum, but at least I was no pushover.